All right.
Good morning. It's the 26th of September. I've got the pleasure of having John Rachel's company today for our interview. John is a prolific writer over many years. He's written novels, also non-fiction political analysis books. He's a songwriter, music producer, peace activist. He's lived in dozens of countries, has a world and wealth of knowledge that he's going to share with us. And a major theme of John Rachel's work, and by the way, you can follow John on his website at jdrachel.com. Is that right, John?
Right.
So please check with that. We're going to talk about John's latest book, Electing a Kennedy Congress. One thing that is loud and clear in John's recent work is political reform in the United States, the urgency of it, and perhaps reform is too mild a word. John actually advocates for regime change, a major overhaul of the American political system. Without further ado, I'm going to give it over to the eminent John Rachel to elaborate on his new book, Electing a Kennedy Congress. John, welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Cindy. Good seeing you again. When RFK or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. entered the presidential foray, I was very, very encouraged by much of what he said. He represents a whole different level of integrity, openness, thoughtfulness. He's a very, very bright guy. He has some controversial stands on certain things that some people consider kind of a knockout for him. For example, his position on the COVID vaccines. I personally I'm not enamored at all by his position on Israel or some of his ideas about how we pay for healthcare. But everything else is just is a very, very encouraging sign. He's talking about ending the wars. He's talking about completely reversing our foreign policy of confrontation and intimidation and military conquest. He's talking about shutting that down, seeking cooperative win-win relationships with other countries in the world. So those in itself are enough for me to be very hopeful.
Although,
However,
John, can I just intervene here? I mean, we've been here before with hopeful candidates. I mean, Barack Obama in 2008, hope and change. You remember all that. Trump was promising a new beginning. Every time it's a huge disappointment. What's different about Robert Kennedy Jr.? What makes you more optimistic?
I'm not optimistic. I don't think he's going to make it, to be honest with you. What is encouraging to me is the fact that he represents a different type of political mindset, a different worldview. He's asking questions and making challenges that nobody else is. Having said that, I think that the fixation on the presidential race is quite wrong-headed. Now, you have to understand that this campaign I've been on goes all the way back to 2012 when I was talking about getting rid of everybody in Congress back then. Everybody thought, of course, I was too extreme and a lunatic. But the fact of the matter is the Congress is owned lock, stock, and barrel by Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, the deep state, and just the ruling elite. We can expect no action from them which will ever cause any serious positive change in the direction of America. Point blank. That's why I call for regime change. Now, let me couple that with the other important point of the book. The important point of this book is that the real power constitutionally resides in Congress. If you look, Congress makes all of the laws. Congress sets the entire legal and social and economic and rules for everything. If a president were to get completely out of line, Congress can reverse every single one of his signing statements, his presidential edicts. They can reverse everything. And to put it in a nutshell, the president cannot impeach Congress, but Congress can impeach the president. That is the ultimate power. It's just saying we've had enough, and they can take him out of office. This is a hard thing for some reason for Americans to grasp, that if you really want to seize power and put it back in the hands of the people, give a voice to the people, you have to take every single one of those seats in Congress, 100 in the Senate and the 435 in the House. You have to take possession of those and put in place somebody who reports directly to, who answers to, who listens to, who works for the people, not for the big corporations. So so the point of this book. This is the last iteration. I had a version of this for Bernie Sanders. In other words, to elect a Bernie-friendly Congress. I've had versions of this all along, but nobody seems to understand that investing all of your faith, or to use the idiom, putting all your eggs in one basket, is no way to change the direction of the country, because that's not where the real power is.
Meaning investing all your eggs in one person, all your aspiration for political change in one figure, like Robert Kennedy Jr. or Trump or anybody, one figure. It has to be a mass movement, a mass change.
Well, I opened the book, as you know from reading it. I opened it by saying, just look at what kind of situation we'll have. Let's say Robert F. Kennedy wins the election, and we have the Congress that we have in place now. Well, he appeared before them July 20th, and he was ripped from one end to the other. I mean, maliciously vilified by his own party. 102 members of the Democratic Party, his party, tried to keep him from even appearing. So you would have like a enlightened president, and you'd still have the same Congress in place. It would be total gridlock. It would be the worst bloody cage fight in the history of America.
You'd wonder, John, why Robert Kennedy Jr. is associating with, caucusing with the Democrats. Then why doesn't he go out on his own to form a new third independent party, the Workers' Party or the People's Party or something, like that? What's the benefit of him remaining inside the Democrat Party?
Well, there is actually some rumblings. There's some very, very quiet rumblings about him running as an independent. The disadvantages are you have to get on the ballot, and every state has their own procedures for getting on the ballot. So that's a big obstacle. Both the independent candidates and two third-party candidates, like the Green Party, they had to work for 15 years to get on all the ballots. So that's a big disadvantage. There's the other thing, which is just the stigma. People are creatures of habit, sadly. It's interesting because when you poll Americans, the independents, people who say, I'm independent, I'm really not loyal to either major party, is a majority. It's like 43 or 45%. And then the other people are, but when they walk in the voting booth, the fear of electing the wrong guy sets in. In other words, and you get a lot of this kind of talk, like a lot of people blame Jill Stein and they blame Ralph Nader for defeating the Democratic candidate. In other words, they enter the race and they steal from the good party as if the Democratic Party is worth considering good. And so there's that fear of that. There is also just the creature of habit thing. Well, my parents my grandparents voted Republican, So I don't necessarily take issue with him running as a Democrat. He could run as anything. But the truth of the matter is the Democratic Party will sabotage his campaign like they did Bernie in 2016. If he stays a Democrat, he will not be on the ballot. If they have to assassinate him, they will.
Unless he creates a kind of a critical mass of support that pushes.
Bernie had a critical mass. Bernie had he had the largest populist uprising in recent history. And all the polls at that time said if their election were held between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, Bernie won by a landslide. And the Democratic Party just couldn't stomach his democratic socialism. So they rigged the primaries and defeated, threw him off the ballot. That's what will happen to Robert F. Kennedy.
And then invented the whole Russiagate, nonsense. Yeah, John. On the international political issues, he is quite distinctive in that he's calling for a return to diplomacy with Russia. He's not looking at Russia as this, kind of a mystical evil that the mainstream American politics and media are obsessed with. Likewise with China, he's returning to a realpolitik of engaging with these, very important countries, nuclear superpowers. You fear that if there isn't a radical change towards a more diplomatic US foreign policy, that the United States is on a very dangerous collision course of global confrontation with those two powers that we mentioned, China and Russia. You fear that if this opportunity to change the American Congress, the White House, isn't seized upon this time around, then we're into very dangerous territory. We already
a number of very, very prominent politicians and a number of think tanks have said we're going to go to war with China. That's the plan. I mean, these people are so they used to be at least somewhat subtle, but they're not subtle anymore. They even say now the real reason why they want Ukraine to win is to destroy Russia. And that's you can look at the Rand Company, for example, as a very, very top-notch and highly respected think tank. In 2019, they wrote a paper saying the way to destabilize Russia and to achieve regime change is using Ukraine as a battering ram. They said this in 2019. Now these same people, these same brilliant people who only see war, and more war as options, they're talking about going to war with China because we can't, apparently, they don't think we can compete with them economically, even though, this is what's really just astonishing. Is that America has so many brilliant people. We have some of the best universities in the world. If we just put some of this money into R&D, we could compete, we could beat China. But instead, we target them as a political and a military adversary, and then we start making our war plans. I mean, just look at a map. How many bases does China have surrounding the United States? None. And then you look at the map, America, they're still putting up more bases. They're building more bases in the Philippines. They're building more bases here in Japan. I mean, it's all these people can think is military confrontation, surround, contain, attack. And as long as you have that mentality and you have a Congress is really frightening because both parties are war parties now. There's nobody talks about peace anymore.
Yeah. And Robert Kennedy Jr., you feel confident is very cognizant of these nefarious forces, the militarism of US foreign policy, and wants to do something about it.
He's come right out and said the CIA is the biggest terrorist organization in the world. They're the ones that killed my uncle. I mean, he pulls no punches, which is why he probably may come to a very sad ending. I don't know whether you've watched any of his public addresses, but he is very, very blunt. And he says, this militarism has to stop. It's destroying us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about a very profound wrong turn in or development in the American system after the Second World War, the birth of the military-industrial complex, the warning by Eisenhower in 1961, outgoing president, who warned about the militarism of the American capitalist system, that it was going to destroy the country. John Kennedy, Robert's uncle, also was aware of the huge negative destructive force of the military regime, the deep state. tried to confront it, ended up being assassinated by the forces of the deep state. No doubt about it. The book, James Douglas, JFK and the Unspeakable, makes it kind of uncontestable that it was an assassination by the deep state, by the CIA, perhaps using mafia hitmen. Robert Kennedy referenced that book recently in an interview. He's well aware of the background. So, John, we are up against a really dangerous, a very fiendish, profound force that's become established in the United States over decades, the military-industrial complex and its apparatus. This is what makes the election of somebody like Robert Kennedy Jr. a very precarious prospect, unless he gets a massive mass mobilization behind him, or something to deter the evil forces that would have him assassinated or neutralized in some way. What do you think? Do you think that? I mean, I think you've already said this, but on the one hand, you're hoping that he succeeds, but on the other hand, you're saying that his chances are slim in succeeding.
So the consolation prize would be a Congress, 435 representatives that embraced and promoted his agenda. So if he doesn't make it, we have a Congress working for that same agenda, that same peace-seeking, cut the military, put the people back in the equation agenda. That's what the whole point of my book is, that while it's easy, I don't want to sound denigrating, but it's kind of intellectually lazy, to be honest with you, to put your eggs in the RFK Jr. basket. The truth is, if he goes down, then what do you have? You have nothing. If you work at a local level, there's 34 Senate seats up for grab. It goes in 3 cycles, the Senate, because it's 6 years. 34 Senate seats. You got 435 House of Representatives. If you had Kennedy mindset, Kennedy worldview people in there, they wouldn't be owned by the ruling elite. They would be, according to the contract that I've drawn up, they would go in there to do the job that RFK Jr. himself set out to do. So with or without him, you have that enormous amount of power. But people ignore Congress. It's not flashy to, it doesn't, it's not like really good news items to talk about congressional races. I mean, the flashy stuff is Trump versus Hillary versus that's the stuff that captures people's attention. But we have to discipline ourselves a little and just think. And I just tell people, go back to your high school civics class. It's right there. Congress has the power. And so, yes, work for RFK Jr. or work for Cornel West is another man I totally admire. I think Cornel West is like a god. He's a professor of philosophy, and that's my academic background. He's a wonderful man. Work for them, but should they fail, you're still going to need a Congress that embraces that type of those policies, that mindset, that worldview, because if you don't, we're just going to keep sliding further and further toward the abyss of nuclear annihilation is where I think we're heading.
Yeah, right.
And on that cheery note,
yeah. John,
sorry about that.
I just quickly to kind of clarify, perhaps maybe for anybody listening to this, it's not that you're not endorsing the Democrat Party. I mean, in your book, Electing a Kennedy Congress, you're scathing of both parties. I mean, you really rip the Democrat Party as corrupt and disconnected as you do with the Republican Party. So perhaps we should make that clear. You're not endorsing Kennedy Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr., Mr. Robert Kennedy Jr., out of an affiliation to the Democratic Party.
The party is just a vehicle. The thing about the major parties is they have the machinery. If they were to get behind him, he would win by a landslide, but they won't. So that they have the machinery for electing, their congressmen, the senators, everything. So I've done this exercise before. I have something called the CFAR, the Contract for American Renewal. which is very similar to the contract that's in my book there. And it's just a list of things that basically 60 to 90% of Americans want done. And to me, I don't care if a person runs as a Green, as an independent, as a Republican. Last in CFAR 2018, I had some Republicans. I said to this one guy, said, you know, you seem like a really sane and sensible person. Why are you running as a Republican? He said, well, we haven't had a Democrat elected in this district since 1854. So it's not an option. You either run as a Republican or you just have no chance. So the party label doesn't matter if they sign on to the agenda that has been laid out here. In this particular book, it's a Robert F. Kennedy agenda for remaking government and remaking America in the image it's supposed to live up to. It doesn't matter how, because once they get in Congress, they're obligated via this commitment that they've made to pursue that agenda. So why even put a label on it? It's not conservative, it's not liberal, it's not socialist. It's just a good, righteous way to take the country, you know? And that's another thing that people have trouble. I have often been accused of I've been accused both of trying to promote the Democratic Party and destroy the Democratic Party. I mean, this is ridiculous thinking. I think these people must have learned their political science like in a street gang or something, you know?
Yeah. So, John, we're going to mention your previous book, The Peace Dividend. Copy of it here in my hand. I mean, that explains, I think that conveys the depth of the problem in the American system, the United States economy, this political system, just the absolute dominance of the military apparatus, the military system, the military economy. It's the heartbeat of the American capitalist system. I mean, you've outlined in this book, The Peace Dividend, and you allude to it too in your new book, the Electing the Kennedy Congress, that, you know, with this dominance is such a warping, distorting, overwhelming force on the American society, the American economy, that unless that's somehow overturned, then change will be is futile. People need to really focus on the dismantling of the militarized economy that the American capitalist system has become. Would you like to expound on that?
There's a guy named Ray McGovern. You may have run into him, a brilliant guy, ex-CIA guy, and he's expanded. I think if I can get all these letters right, the military, industrial, congressional, media, think tank, academia complex. So one of the key, in fact, interestingly, when Dwight Eisenhower came up with the idea of the military industrial complex, it was actually originally called the military industrial congressional complex, because Congress plays a vital role in perpetuating the militarism, the war economy, and so forth. And why do they do that? Do they do that out of principle? No. They do that because that's what the donor class wants. Rich people make tons of money on war. It's just a fact of life. And they don't want to change that. They don't want to slow the gravy train down. The point that I make in the Peace Dividend is, the Peace Dividend book, is that this is absolutely, not only is a complete fraud, we don't have to fight all these wars. We don't need all this unnecessary military junk. We don't need 800 bases around the world. We need none of it. But that money is literally coming out of the wallets of every single American. This money just doesn't, you know, float in on the good ship Lollipop. So the point of the Peace Dividend is to get people aware of how much the war economy, the militarism, the imperial project, which is the conquest of the world, detracts from them personally and from their neighborhoods and their communities. It literally steals money from them under fraudulent circumstances and hopefully get people to demand the money back.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a far-fetched idea, but it's
John, do you think Robert Kennedy Jr. is aware, or he understands the concept, that same analysis that you have just articulated there? Would he agree? Do you think he's aware of what needs to be dismantled, the militarism?
I think he's aware of what needs to be dismantled, but I think he would get to that place in an entirely different set of logic. If I could sit down with him for 30 minutes, he would be convinced that my analysis is, you see, my analysis isn't the only one. There are a lot of reasons to take the whole military mechanism apart. The reason I focused on this particular approach is because it personalizes it. It makes people realize, every F-35, which costs $1.2 million, is money out of their wallet. When you start adding this stuff up, it's over $7 trillion now since the Soviet Union broke up. So the whole thing is, I calculate everything from 1992. The increases in the budget and all, just the senseless wars and so forth, I just added up. It comes to over $7 trillion, which is like $22,000 for every single American citizen that they've been literally ripped off.
Nearly 20% of the total national debt of the United States, which is 34 trillion now. Yes, but as you've kind of alluded to earlier on, John, there are very powerful vested interests in keeping the militarized economy going. Anybody who stands in the way of that free run of profits or money into the system via from taxpayers' pockets is liable to be destroyed. I mean, John F. Kennedy in 1963, I mean, absolutely barbarically, audaciously, his head blown off in broad daylight by American assassins from the deep state. That's how violent, that's how
ruthless
the system is. This Robert Kennedy Jr. is taking on a very dangerous beast in running for this White House, especially when he's cognizant of the forces that he's up against.
Right.
But having said that, you're not.
I wasn't telling you. Somebody was walking in the room here.
Don't worry, I get it, John. It's, yeah, but anyway, you're.
But yes, he is putting his life at risk, and just to show you how heartless and how skewed these people are, Joe Biden will not give him Secret Service protection. That he is the first major presidential candidate in American history that is not being given Secret Service protection to keep somebody from blowing his head off. So this is you don't have to tell me how sick these people are. They're
I saw reported, John. I find that really amazing. I couldn't believe it. That's how brazen it is that they didn't. And there was somebody stopped at one of his rallies recently this week. I think some guy was armed to the teeth, trying to get in, but somehow he was stopped by security personnel. But as you put it there, John, he is putting his life on the line in this election, which, really, when you think about it, it really puts the American political system into a very stark and ugly perspective. I mean, that anybody who actually does run for democratic principles and democratic objectives, like sharing out the wealth, is putting their life at risk. I mean, that shows you how barbaric the system is, and yet Washington would lecture other countries, Russia, China, Iran, about democracy and what have you,
democratic values. So
yeah.
right.
But one guy who would step forward to really profoundly challenge it, not in a cosmetic way as maybe Obama or Trump did before, but somebody who really does want to address the depth of the problem is liable to be assassinated. That's
Well,
quite
it's just one
shocking.
person putting their life on the line to save 5 billion. Because if we keep going the way we're going, we're going to end up in World War III, and the chances of that going nuclear are very, very high. So, people have to step up. At the time of John F. Kennedy Jr., there were a number of people in Congress that were really remarkable human beings, good people that represented good values and spoke out, but there's nobody in there anymore. People say, well, what about my congressman? So I tell them, well, here's a test. Just run this test in your congressman. You tell me that they're worth voting back in. You saw it in the book. It's just a list of, did your congressman ever introduce to a bill to raise the minimum wage to either $15 or $20 an hour? Did your congressman ever, on and on it goes. 90% of the people in this country, if they checked on their congressman, they'd find these people have done nothing but sit in a very cushy job, get wined and dined by a lot of lobbyists, and they're not working for the people. It's just that simple.
So it's the electing a Kennedy Congress, your book, John, as with the Peace Dividend book, your previous title, the argument really is it has to be a total overhaul of the political class, not just in the White House, but in Congress. That's the essential message.
And it has to be people driven. People have to, within each community, find somebody. And I think I said in the book there, I find it hard to believe that in a population of 334 million, we can't find 469 people with the integrity and the goodwill and the honesty and determination to help save America. That we can't find somebody like that, an ex-high school principal or an ex-police chief or a clergyman or whatever. There's somebody in your community that everybody loves and trusts, and that person embodies those kind of values. That's the kind of person every community should identify and then qualify them completely. Are they, could you go along with this type of agenda? Well, there are people been running for office all along that represent these values. Bernie Sanders had so many people behind him. This is what the people want. So this regime change has to be people driven. It can't be something contrived by the ruling elite to just do a makeover,
And would you one last question, John? Do you think that you're tapping into a deep popular desire for regime change? They may not put it in without those two words, regime change, but you think that the zeitgeist, the popular the groundswell of popular feeling out there in the United States is for a radical change of Washington,
I don't know. I don't know what word to put on it. I would use the word radical because I think we need radical and deep systemic change. To me, there's a good metric, and that is, what is the congressional approval rating right now? It's something like 11%, something ridiculously low. 11% of the people think Congress is doing a good job. Well, that's a start. I mean, at least they recognize there's a problem. Now, whether they understand well enough to know exactly what needs to be done, that's the point of my book, is saying, look, here's when we ask people what they want. These are the things they say year after year after year. And it's usually around the economy. It's around social, a good social net, protection for the vulnerable. It's a whole host of things that people say over and over and over they want. They even want Citizens United. They know that Citizens United was a horrible, horrible Supreme Court case and decision, and they want that reversed. I mean, so here's the list. Find somebody in your community that can get behind this, and you get behind them and put them in Congress. You put them in Congress, not the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party or anybody else. You put them in Congress using whatever mechanisms you have to, whether it's you putting them in a Democratic primary or Republican primary or running as an independent. It all varies so much from state to state. You have every single race has to be kind of tailored to that particular district. But it takes people being aware, getting off the couch, getting off of TikTok and Facebook, and getting out and talking to other people and saying, you know, this country's a mess. Let's do something to fix it, you know?
Yeah. John, Rachel, thank you very much for your company today, and great conversation. I wish you well with the new book, John. Electing a Kennedy Congress. Good luck with it, John. What's the feedback been like so far?
I've got all 5-star ratings, and I've the real test will be this coming Friday, because I mailed 6 copies to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign headquarters. So right. Really be curious to see how they react to it. That will be a big test.
Well, personally, John, I hope Robert Kennedy Jr. reads your book and the peace dividend, and it would be sweet if he appointed you as an advisor on international affairs and local community regeneration of democracy. You know, quite divergent spheres like international affairs, but local politics. Because your aspirations are very noble, and they deserve to be widely heard.
Well, thank you, sir. It's been great talking to you again, and I think we're about ready to bid adieu here.
Okay, John. All the best,
Thank you,
John.
sir.
Thank you.
Best to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.